bring it all to order. Welcome, everybody, for the work session. I know the Parks Department is in the house, so Shawsheen Baker, Kelly Ham, and Byron Sanders.
Mayor. Good afternoon. I'm Shawsheen Baker, and this afternoon we have our engineering colleagues with me presenting an update on the 2022 Parks Bond. This bond consists of 23 Parks and Greenway projects, and with the total amount being $275 million.
I also forgot to say that Councilor Branch has an excused absence, so excuse me.
That's fine. Thank you. Well, this update is part of our ongoing effort to keep the council informed of the bond process. And some of the information presented today will be similar to the presentation we provided to the previous council last fall. And we're going to kick off with a brief recap of the collaboration and engagement to date, and then look at the brief summary of the bond budget rollout, and the engineering services staff will provide the bond status, the bond project status, and then we'll finish up by looking at the reporting dashboard and next step actions. The implementation, sorry, this is a little low. The implementation of this bond process is truly an interdepartmental collaborative effort. And most of the projects are co-managed by Raleigh Parks and Engineering Services, and involve a wide range of expertise from many city departments. Externally, we have worked with community members very closely, and since the beginning of the bond process about a year and a half ago, we have conducted over 120 engagement events, and most of which were accompanied by online opportunities to maximize public input. And we have also worked very frequently with Parks, Recreation, and Greenway Advisory Board and other boards and commissions on progress reviews before we bring projects to the council table for milestone approvals. This page is from the FY, not FY, no acronyms, fiscal year 2024 adopted budget book showing the 4-year bond rollout, and we're currently in year 2. As some of you may recall, back in spring 2022, before the bond was officially put on the election ballot in November, the draft bond proposal presented to council was just shy of $300 million. And after council deliberation, the final amount ended up being $275 million, which left just over $20 million in funding gap. So since the passing of the bond, staff has been working very diligently looking for alternative funding sources. To date, we have secured over $10 million, including $8.6 million from Department of Interior for Smoky Hollow Park, and the $1.5 million HUD grant for the South Park Heritage Trail. Plus, we have over $400,000 partnership agreement already developed for the neighborhood connections on Crabtree Creek Trail. And I also want to point out that the $1.5 million HUD grant for the Heritage Trail was part of a $3 million grant secured through Congresswoman Deborah Ross's office from HUD, and the other half was intended for the Chavis-Dix Strollway project. And we have not stopped there, and we're still constantly looking for and going after grants and partnership opportunities, and we currently already have a couple in the pipeline waiting to hear back. And at this point, I would like to invite my engineering services colleague to provide the project update.
Thanks, Shawsheen. Good afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit about project status. Just to orient you to this slide, as you go down the slide, you'll see the park bond projects. And as you go across the top, you'll see various stages of project development, starting with RFQ, planning engagement, schematic design, construction documents, then permitting, bidding, construction, and finally completion. And as Shashin mentioned, we gave City Council an update last September, and we wanted to show the progress at that time in green, and then the progress since then in this dark blue color, so you can just kind of visually quickly see there's a lot of progress happening on these projects. And I'll mention that even for the projects where you don't see an entire phase advancing in blue, there's still a lot of progress occurring on those projects. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail on the projects. This is for fiscal year 24 funded projects. We have one project that's under construction. That's the Dorothea Dix Gibson Play Plaza project, and we're on schedule for a spring 2025 completion. We have a couple projects in the bid award phase. That's Lake Wheeler Road and Strickland Road and Leesville Road. We have 4 projects in permitting, including Biltmore Hills Tennis expansion, Green Road Park improvements, Lakeland Trail West Loop, and Partnership for Community Connection at Crabtree Creek. I'm not going to mention all the projects that we have in design, but I did want to mention several of these projects, including John Chavis Historic Park, John P. Top Green, Method Community Center, and Walnut Creek Greenway improvements. Were all had their schematic designs approved by City Council and have advanced to design development or further stages of design since our last update, so that was a big milestone. We have just a couple projects in contract negotiation, including Neuse River Park and Neighborhood and Community Connections. And I want to mention that since our last update, the Neuse River Master Plan was approved, and we've been working with the designer and hope to be able to bring forward a contract soon for design through construction.
Yeah, we have, Counselor Silver has a question.
Can you just clarify,
Yes.
if you go back to the slide,
Absolutely.
what is the Neighborhood and Community Connections?
Sure. That is a project to look at several different community connections to Greenway. So places where you might be close to the Greenway with a neighborhood, but it's not connected yet.
So just clarify, I'm assuming these are like trailheads. Are these, what is the intent? Just so I understand, it's close, but what does that mean? It's a project to actually acquire, to take it from a trail to a paved path? I just don't understand when you say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, it would be a new Greenway connection to connect those neighborhoods to that. So it would basically be the full project from feasibility to acquisition to construction of that segment to be able to connect that segment of Greenway.
Is it, what, does the city own it, or it's an easement, just so I understand? I mean, I like the
Okay.
program, I'm just trying to
Yes.
understand.
Okay.
Now it's in contract negotiation, so is this to
Yeah.
design it, to actually acquire the property, to establish those connections? It's a great program, I'm just trying to understand how this works.
Okay. Shashin, do you want to? Okay.
Thank you, Kelly. This program is really intended to bring short little connections to the trails and the parks. And we have a goal of bringing residents to parks and greenways within 10-minute walk, anybody within the city. And some of the trails, as you know, the segments are rather long with no accesses. And so that's one of the goals for this program, to bring short little connections to the greenway so that you don't have to go all the way around to another trailhead. And some of these projects, we have about, I believe we brought this one to council last year. We have, if I remember correctly, 4 or 5 connections here. I remember one of them, we do need to negotiate easements, and the other ones, we do already have either easements or property rights.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Shashin. Let's see. So for fiscal year 25 funded projects, we have a couple in design, which is Aaronsbrook Park and Sertoma Arts Center, and one in contract negotiation, which is the Dix Park Creek and Grove project. When we gave the update to City Council last time, we mentioned that there was a park bond dashboard in the works, and we're pleased to announce that version 1 of that internal dashboard has been released as of last December. And the goal is to get more feedback internally to inform being able to expand that, release it externally, and potentially use it for other CIP and bond projects. It's been a team effort across the city. including the city manager's office, finance, budget, parks, engineering service, IT, and communications. And the bond dashboard is not only able to track schedule, budget, and cash flow for individual projects, but it also can track the bond overall. And there's just a few screenshots here. And some of the aims of the dashboard was to simplify park visual of status of the park bond projects, as well as to increase transparency and accuracy of tracking and accountability for staff delivering projects. So our next steps are we're going to continue to gather feedback and finalize it internally, and then collaborate to expand that dashboard to be able to launch it externally, as well as to apply it to other types of projects. And IT has been leading the effort to continue with Trimble Unity Construct. It was formerly called eBuilder, but now it's been rebranded. And to continue to expand that tool and to make it integrate with PeopleSoft, so it'll be sort of a one-stop shop for project information. And of course, finally, we want to continue the successful delivery of park projects. That concludes our presentation, and staff's available for questions.
Go ahead, Council.
Hi, I have a handful. One, the $10 million that are secured in federal funding, what level of certainty are there on those? Do we have the money in the bank yet?
There are two projects, if you remember. Smoky Hollow was one that was from Department of Interior, and we have been awarded the contract for both projects. The grant contracts have not been executed, and we're currently in the Q&A stage. And as we speak today, and I just received a notification today that our local gatekeeper, who is the NC Parks agency, and they have approved our response. It's a Q&A stage response back to Department of Interior, so we're going to get that turned around to them really quick. They've been very encouraging. And the same with the HUD grant, and our contact has been very encouraging again. I think I know why you're asking because of the recent news release, and we've been really just in the Q&A stage, and we have recently gone through a similar process for another grant from Department of Interior, and that was executed back in just last month, just the final Q&A stage, and once they're happy with all our answers, and we'll bring the contracts to the council table for execution.
So it sounds like we have some optimism that those will finish their life cycle.
It's a $10 million question.
Literally. And then just wanted to confirm that you said the dashboard's not externally facing yet, but that's the intention that it will be. And did you say, and I missed, when that is likely to happen?
So that's a great question, and we don't have an answer today. We are trying to get more feedback, and then hopefully we can come back with that information.
Okay. Do you think like 3 months, 6 months, a year? I don't want to put you on the spot, just like
We'll
a
have to.
loose ballpark.
Yeah, we'll have to defer to IT, probably, I would think several months probably, but we'll defer to IT.
Okay,
Yeah,
got
get
it.
back.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes.
Sure, if you got one. Yeah, if you got one.
Hey, good afternoon. Beth Stagner with IT. So we do have the internal that's functioning, and as Kelly said, we've got staff looking at it because it's a lot of different data from different sources that's got to get married up. And so we want to be very certain that it's saying the right things, and we are doing our due diligence of tracking it the way we should. On the public side, one of the things we have to do is streamline that because it's very busy, and even if you know, like we could give it to you and we'd have to tell you what it all is. So we want to work with community engagement and communications to say, what makes sense for the public to not leave them with more questions than answers. So we're looking at how quickly we can kind of slim that down and streamline it to get it out. So I'm hoping sometime this summer.
Yep.
Yeah, my question is around Bitmore Hills. I know that, and Stephen's kind of peeking around the corner, there have been a number of folks in the community that had some questions about the tennis court projects and some other things. I see it's in permitting. Have y'all been able to meet with residents and kind of address the issues and concerns that they've raised?
Good afternoon, Stephen Bentley with Raleigh Parks. I'm not aware of any outstanding questions. The last questions we got were around budget, and we gave Mr. Smith kind of the schedule of values, and that was as recent as this weekend at the community meeting. Yeah.
Had a question. Y'all are obviously working hard on many, many projects for parks. How do you feel about the pace, and is there anything the council can do, right, to just facilitate executing all these ambitious projects?
I'll only speak for parks. We started the bond process in 2019, paused because of COVID, and that gave us a chance to spend 2 years of putting all of this in place. So every project had a charter, had a schedule. We did cost estimation and escalation. Prior bond projects that I was associated with, when the bond was adopted, then we started. So I feel very good about where we're at. Actually, I think at your next council meeting, you'll award the bid for Leesville Road. And so within 18 months, we already have a project that's going to go under construction, which is really good.
Okay, thank you.
Other projects I'll allow Byron to talk about.
Yep, Councilor Jones.
Hey, thank you for this. I just wanted to really commend you guys for the outreach that you've done. I was at ECAC meeting last month with Councilor Branch, and you guys were talking about Top Green, I think.
Top Green.
And giving the community the update on where you stand. I'm really proud of how you're implementing this and how you're making sure the community is involved. So I just wanted to give my hats off, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, Councilor Silver.
I had a question about the design process and public engagement. I know we have a Parks Board, but are there stages along the design process that I know there's schematic and then there's advanced one. So how does that work for the Parks Board and the public, and then for City Council? At what point do we get to see a design? Because I know I was very excited when we saw Smoky Hollow, but
Yes.
at that point it was kind of at the end of the stream and didn't want
Yes.
to interfere at all. So can you explain the kind of schematic design process, public, Parks Board, and then how does council get a chance to look that it's not at the end when we know that timing is critical to move the project forward?
Good question. Typically, it is at schematic design where we seek your official endorsement to move forward with design documents and construction documents. For major initiatives, I'll use John Chavis. We'll give you an update like this every 6 months. The designs really will not change much besides detailing. So you see renderings, floor plans, cross-sections at the schematic level. If the council would like to see more detailed presentations, it would be a request through the city manager to say, can you bring me it at design develop or 60% design?
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Right,
I'm
oh, you do?
I was
Okay.
waiting to, mine's a little off topic, a little afield, so I was waiting until everyone was done with their real ones. I know it's not a bond project, but can you speak to Forestville Road Park progress?
Sure, and I'll see you Friday for a tour of it. So we have thanks to our team in planning, the UPG negotiated a development agreement. So we have funds through master planning and early concept design. At that point, it would be the council's request for staff to put that in the budget. Our current funding really only allows for capital maintenance through our penny, so we would have to work with budget and finance on what are the possibilities for a construction budget. Is that helpful?
And you put out a notice for the CAG.
Yes.
Do you have a thought, like when the Parks Board will return that?
Thursday.
Yeah, we're going to present the situation assessment, including the CAG membership, to Parks Board this month. And I believe you're not the liaison anymore, but you're more than welcome to join us. And we already work with the park committee. And for most of these bond projects, we don't just take milestone reviews to the board. We also work with their subcommittees and Monday nights to review progress as well. And the same with the First Wheel project.
All right, any other questions for the Parks team? All right, appreciate the work. Thank you. And next we have the transportation bond update, and we have Kenneth Ritchie and Byron Sanders.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Kenneth Ritchie with Transportation, here with Byron Sanders from our partners in engineering services to provide an update on the transportation bond. Whoop, apologies. So from an agenda standpoint, I'll kind of walk through project origins. I'll kind of talk through some overview on bond and capital funding. We'll transition to Byron to kind of provide an update on where we are with delivery of the 2017 bond, and then we'll kind of talk through some next steps that we've got upcoming. So when we look at how projects originate, they come from our comprehensive plan. They come from a number of area and corridor plans, and we also get a number of resident council requests that we really try and look at from a basis of safety, congestion, transit, bike ped demand, economic development, and certainly now we've got a more emphasis on that safety element, and then equity has become another big factor that we look at when we look at prioritization. And when we look at how those projects move forward in the funding, those allocations are reviewed annually through the CIP and the budget process. So we've got those, and we'll go through a little bit of the history on the bonds, but we've had bonds at different frequencies and different cadences, but in between, we're able to review those on an annual basis with the council through that CIP process. So when we look at capital project funding, a significant portion, about 60% of the funding comes from bonds. And then the other 40% is about 25% of PAYGO or cash, and then our kind of grants through our federal partners or other agency partners that help us to kind of stretch those tax dollars a little bit further. When we look at the transportation bond history, going back to 2005, we had about a $60 million bond. 6 years later, 2011 was $40 million, 2013, 75, and then in 2017, we had 206.7, and that's really the focus of what we continue to deliver on today. So as we get into the context and updates on the projects, really want to kind of set a baseline in terms of what are some of those factors that drive projects, and really when we're looking at that, schedule and cost become two of the big things that are impacts to our projects. As I kind of drop into that, I will reference an article that was in the N&O last week from Richard Stradling talking about, this article was focused on DOT projects and the impacts they're seeing, but there were some critical pieces there. And as you see here, one of the big things, which we've all seen, but this really kind of contextualizes it, in the last 3 years, we've seen a 67% increase in the construction cost index from the National Highway Department of Transportation compared to 22% over the previous 14 years. So we really have seen some unprecedented economic changes that have impacted not only what we're experiencing, but certainly what our partners at NCDOT are experiencing. And this will be referenced later in the presentation, but the US 1 freeway expansion project 3 years ago was about $750 million. It is now in the STIP for about $1.34 billion. So what we're seeing from a cost increase standpoint is really on par with what we're seeing across the landscape of roadway construction, both nationally and within the state. So when we look at cost drivers, the real estate market is certainly a big one that we have seen over the course of the last few years as the real estate has astronomically changed on us in the midst of delivering the 2017 bond. Another factor, the materials market, it's always been one that's been challenging to try and target. With roadway construction especially, the reliance on asphalt has always fluctuated based off the oil prices. And so trying to track that, but certainly as we've seen increases in steel and other materials, that challenges some of those estimates that we've got. And then the labor market. And certainly I think we're going to continue to see a challenge with the labor market. One data point I heard at a recent symposium, there are about 250 plus contractors right now in the western part of North Carolina assisting with the recovery efforts. And I think for the next few years, we're going to continue to see that type of commitment of resources out in western North Carolina as they recover from the impacts of Helene. And then when we look at schedule drivers, you will see that some of these are very similar to those cost drivers. Time obviously does equal money when it comes to trying to mitigate those fluctuations. Project scoping is an area, as we get further down the life cycle of a project, if we're looking to change that scope, it's going to impact that schedule. So anytime we look at schedule changes throughout the life cycle of a project, it can impact that timeline of delivery. Public engagement and feedback, looking to make sure that as we move through that, the further we get into the process, again, going back to that project scoping, if that feedback's leading to changes to scope, that's also going to create some challenges in terms of trying to maintain our schedules. External coordination and permitting with a lot of our projects. We've got a lot of projects that are on DOT facilities. We've got responsibilities and requirements coming through NCDEQ, environmental permitting, and others that can impact our schedules. We try to proactively get with those agencies ahead of time, but certainly once we get into the fine-tuned details, that does create an area that we have to be mindful of from a schedule standpoint. Property acquisition, just like it impacts cost, it can impact timing. Certainly, a goal is to try and settle as many of these acquisitions as possible, but certainly the longer that drags out, it can impact the construction cost of our projects. But certainly when we look at condemnation, there can also be an additional cost that comes as part of that. So it's really a balancing act from that standpoint. And then staff resources, not only internal resources, but as I alluded to, the resources that we've got within our construction and consulting market. And certainly I think we're going to see that as a strain. And I think we've seen that recently with the response we've gotten from some of our construction projects where 5 years ago, we were seeing 6, 7 bidders come for our construction projects. Just trying to get to 3 at times can be a challenge now. So with that baseline, I will now transition over to Byron, who will talk through an update on delivery with our 2017 bond.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Byron Sanders, Engineering Services. Kenneth has teed this up, so I will now kind of walk us through the status of our various bond projects. So on this slide and the next, we'll be covering the programs that are receiving bond funds. Those programs constitute about 30% of the overall bond. We've listed those programs and examples from each program, but I would like to highlight a few of these examples. We've got Lake Boone Trail Safety Improvements. That is a project that is a road diet with bike and ped improvements and signal modifications near 440 at Lake Boone. It is substantially complete. There was some seasonal work, some weather-dependent work, some striping and that sort of thing that needed to take place, but that project should be completing very soon. We've got the intersection improvements associated with New Bern BRT. That is a project that's currently in design. It's at the eastern end of the BRT corridor. It's been kind of detailed to you all as Area 3, if you remember our breakdown of the areas from previous presentations. This installs additional improvements that are outside of the scope of the BRT proper and supports transit in that area. Next, I'll highlight the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. This program delivers 15 to 20 projects annually, and you may recall you received your annual update on this program at the council meeting last week. And then also we've got the Pines at Peach Road, Fenwick Road Connector. This is a project that is adjacent to the southern BRT corridor. And supports a street connection with an affordable housing development. These next group of projects are projects where the projects that were either canceled or had their construction deferred by previous council actions. So Leesville Road B, that was canceled in 2020. Trawick West, Marsh Creek Road, and West Street Extension South. Those are all projects where the construction funding was deferred, but the design funding was retained. Those projects are in design and will be up for construction consideration in a future bond. So now we get to the good stuff. These are projects that are either complete, under construction, or we are on the cusp of starting construction on those projects. So Tryon Road C, Pool Road, Rock Quarry Road A, those projects have been completed. Atlantic Avenue is under construction with an anticipated construction completion of spring 2026. This is a project, if you'll recall, where we had to terminate the contract. So we're on the other side of that. We've got a new contractor on board. They're completing the project, anticipate completion in spring of 26. We've also got Blue Ridge South. That project is also anticipated to complete construction in spring of 26. The next three projects are at the construction bid stage. We are just ready to start construction on those projects. And these are projects that I want to spend a little bit of time on. We've, as Kenneth mentioned earlier, with some of the challenges with inflation and cost increases, we've had to be a bit creative to address those challenges and to continue to deliver these projects. That means we have worked with Stormwater, Raleigh Water, the manager's office, finance, to work our way through these projects, as well as working with our contractors on value engineering solutions to bring these projects into budget. Ultimately, we are working to get the biggest bang for our available bucks. So I'll start with Barwell Road South. For this project, weighing the options, we will need to revise the length of this project to ensure that we have adequate funding to construct it. This project, the original scope was from Rock Quarry Road to Berkeley Lake Road with the realignment of Pearl Road at Rock Quarry. The new scope of this project takes it from Rock Quarry to Tomahawk Trail and still retains the realignment of Pearl Road at Rock Quarry. So while the total length of this project is reduced, the new scope still provides those improvements across the frontage of the school and the park and the fire station. And importantly, we are retaining the realignment of Pearl Road to create a safer four-leg intersection with Pearl Road, Barwell, and Rock Quarry. That bid award should be coming to you as an agenda item in the coming weeks. The next project is Carolina Pines. We were just here last week with a bid rejection for Carolina Pines. At the time, we felt the best way to get this project where it needed to be was to re-advertise it with a reimagined scope that captured a base bid that captured the critical portions of the project with bid alternatives that would allow us to bring the project into budget. Council's decision to table that item allowed us to go back and revisit that item. So I am happy to report that through work with our internal partners with the city, we have secured the funding to deliver that project as originally scoped. Instead of a bid rejection, we anticipate coming forward with a bid award for that project, and it will still take it from Lake Wheeler Road to South Saunders. So the last project that I have here is Lake Wheeler Road. You will see it has an asterisk. It has an asterisk because it's not a 2017 transportation bond project. It is, in fact, a 2022 Parks bond project. However, because transportation has been intimately involved in this project, our roadway design and construction division is managing the project, and there's a lot of interest in this project. We wanted to kind of highlight here what we're doing with it. This is a project that, in order to deliver it within the available funds, we are adjusting the scope of the project, but I think it is important to mention that we are not substantially changing the footprint of this project across the frontage of Dix. So the original project scope went from Maywood all the way east to South Street. We have now clipped a portion of the project on the east that will start the project now just on the Dix side of the railroad, and we'll still take that project on to South Street. Removing this railroad portion west is going to do a couple of things, aside from allowing us to bring Lake Wheeler Road into budget. It's going to allow us to consolidate our railroad coordination. So railroad coordination is a significant part of this project. Our plan is to combine this piece with an intersection improvement project at Maywood, and that is going to allow us to better time, not just consolidate our railroad activities, but to also help us in timing the signals between the railroad crossing and the future signal at Maywood Avenue. So again, the part of the project that we have that we've removed from this, we actually pick up this project west of the Peanut. So everything that was there before across the frontage of Dix will remain. So these next projects are in the final permitting stage. They are almost at the point that we are ready to advertise for bids, but not quite. Blue Ridge North, we are anticipating a bid advertisement this summer, summer 2025, and Old Wake Forest Road and Dixie Forest Road, those projects were combined, and those projects we anticipate to advertise this fall of 2025. Six Forks Road is currently in the real estate acquisition phase. We're going to talk a little bit more about Six Forks in a minute. And Blunt Person and Wake Forest Roundabout, those projects are in the design phase. So we can't talk about the status of projects and not talk about some of the cost inflation, the significant cost inflation and cost increases that we've seen on our highway projects. As Kenneth mentioned earlier, this is not unique to us. NCDOT is experiencing a lot of the same issues, as well as other agencies that are delivering transportation projects. As Kenneth mentioned earlier, what you see on the screen is the example from NCDOT's Capitol Boulevard project. This is a project that in 2018 had an estimated cost of $465 million. By 2023, that estimated cost was $750 million. That estimated cost now stands at $1.34 billion for 10 miles of construction on Capitol Boulevard. What I think is important here is not just that the cost of the project tripled over a 7-year period. I think it's noteworthy that it nearly doubled in the last 2 years. And I think that that is reflective of some of the challenges that we're seeing across our projects, but most notably on Six Forks Road. So we came before council in February of 2024 and received direction to build a 6-lane section with a 6-lane section with an 8-foot multi-use path from Rowan to Millbrook. At the time, the estimated cost for that project was $56.1 million. Our latest estimate for that project is $93.5 million. So that aligns, unfortunately, or fortunately, that aligns with what we're seeing in the NCDOT projects and some of the other projects that we're seeing. We still, however, are committed to deliver a project in this area. And so we are exhausting all scope and funding options to move this project forward. I think it's important to note that we are continuing to acquire real estate along this corridor in key areas, understanding that increases in property value, I think this was something Kenneth mentioned earlier as well, increase in property values are one of the major contributors, but not the sole contributor to the significant increases that we're seeing in the cost of projects. So we are moving forward with real estate. That being said, our plan is to come back to council in May to have a more detailed discussion about Six Forks Road with a plan to move things forward. So next steps. What you see here are the statuses or some upcoming actions for several of the projects that we mentioned earlier, Lake Wheeler, Barwell, Carolina Pines. Those bid awards should be coming to you in the coming weeks. As I just mentioned, we plan to come back in May to have an in-depth discussion about Six Forks Road, and then looking a little further down the road, we are anticipating bid advertisements for Blue Ridge North and Old Wake Forest, Dixie Forest this summer and this fall, respectively. And that concludes the presentation. Staff is available for questions.
Yep, Councilor Lambert Melton.
Thanks. I think it's a little bit more of an observation. Obviously, I'm very frustrated with the Six Forks Road project. I'm sure you all are too. I recall it was a very difficult conversation for us over in the last term. Is the project going to advance? What trade-offs do we have to make? There was a ton of public comment and feedback. We ultimately settled on removing the bike lanes, narrowing the multi-use path, but still making sure that it's up to the minimum industry standards. We cut off segments of Six Forks Road. You know, for me, something I heard that was really impactful is there are folks in the community that are like, I live along this corridor. I know my house is along the line of property that will need to be acquired. I don't know if I have a place. I'm in limbo. Like, I can't sell, but the city hasn't acquired my property yet. And it was just creating so much headache. And so I know we're going to have a more detailed conversation in May, but I think it's really important that we signal to folks what the plan is. I'm happy to hear that we're still acquiring property because I can think of at least one gentleman who he was just in limbo for a long period of time, and we can't have that happen. I will say though, and just level setting, I don't see a lot of room to reduce this project anymore. We already cut off segments. We're doing the bare minimum on the multimodal infrastructure, and so I don't know what the answer is. I'm just shocked that after we did all that work to get it within budget, it's doubled in the past year, and I don't know how we can plan for this in the future or scope the projects in the future, but this has got to be some sort of learning opportunity for all of us.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, you kind of took a lot of the what I was going to say, because again, counting on it being around $55 million and now looking at a price tag of 93, I know you're going to bring something back in May, but I just don't know that we're going to have the ability to absorb that much of an increase or impact in the cost. And so I'm curious to see what you're going to bring back to us, but I think that's going to be a challenge for us here at the table when that conversation happens in May.
Everybody, so I'm just going to come down.
I just want to back up a bit. I have a few questions, so I may stop to let my colleagues ask some questions. This one's for the city manager. I noticed how the amount of the bond escalated dramatically. In 2017, it went to roughly 206. I don't know how long it takes to actually spend that all, but it seems with prices going up, seeing what that trend is there an expectation, or I guess that's our decision of when the next bond will go out for transportation, knowing that there are also other bonds and other needs? When does that conversation happen? Because the concern here is that, you know, $206 million is not buying what it did today. So just want to understand, in terms of strategically, how do we start having a conversation about the next transportation bond? Then I have some questions about cost savings.
Great question, and it's a two-part answer. One, in the late in the spring, we're going to have a work session that's going to look at all of our bond categories: affordable housing, transportation, and parks, to kind of level set and kind of figure out what is our strategy moving forward, to figure out when. Obviously, we stay in communications with the county as well to make sure that we're off cycle when there's a school bond or a Wake Tech bond or a bond for Wake County. So we'll do that in the spring. And then secondly, I think what helps us moving forward is we implemented about a year and a half ago, a different project delivery schedule. When we took on this bond in 2017, it was way too big. And the problem with big bonds is that you can't deliver the projects fast enough because you're in the mode of trying to design, strategize. The steady state mode that we're going into for financing, as well as the new project delivery schedule that we're currently working under, now better positions us. To Stephen's point earlier, we have already done as much of the design and planning. At the point that the bond is approved, we're ready to go, rather than then starting that planning process that through engagement can take 6 to 18 months, just depending upon the project. So we're better positioned from a planning strategy, as well as we'll decide this spring when is the appropriate time to figure out the next cycle of bonds that we
So you
put out.
anticipated my next question. That's refreshing to hear. Again, I don't want to talk about my past practice, but did manage a $1.2 billion annual capital program. We looked at design, procurement, construction, and found ways that we would rationalize it, pre-site investigation to avoid finding things. So if you're all open now, again, it was parks. Roads are very different. The pre-site investigation allowed us to do testing to avoid surprises in the field, which saved millions, but also we embraced public participation, but we had to rationalize it, and we gave the public specific time so you don't have this cycle, because time equals money. The public doesn't always realize, I want another bite at the apple, but that could be another $500,000, $1 million. And so just want to make sure as we look at, you say you rationalize the schedule, that's refreshing to hear, but I think it's important you have to balance public engagement with cost escalation, and I'm shocked, and I'm sure for Six Forks, a lot of it has to do with the real estate acquisition, not just the escalating prices. So I had other follow-up questions, but I'll let my colleagues go. But so long as it sounds like you're on the right track of finding the ways of reducing the schedule, construction's construction, but the design phase can be truncated, and it sounds like you're trying to do that in advance, because time is everything when it comes to construction. And these numbers are shocking across the board. So thank you.
Counselor Jones.
Thank you so much. I just have a few questions. I wanted to start off in, you're talking about the bond projects, and can you help us understand Leesville's safe routes to school improvements so that I can best explain that to my residents?
So that was an improvement project that we did get grant funding for, that was really looking at, there were a lot of gaps in connectivity leading up to Leesville Road, not only on Leesville, but really the perimeter. And so that project closed a lot of those gaps to really enhance the pedestrian experience and be able to give kids the ability, because I know a lot of them lived in that neighborhood across the street, to be able to walk safely to school. And that was completed in, I believe, 2020.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And then two overall questions for me, and I think Councilor Silver was just discussing it. So I want to say, how can we as council best explain, do you have words to help us best explain the cost increases? You know, how, and I guess when we go over Six Forks in May, we'll be able to explain it then, but ongoing and not this moment, if you can help us better be your bodyguards and be your explanations to the public, so that we can level set with them before there's just confusion and frustration.
Yeah, and we appreciate that, and I think certainly that's a conversation we can have to try and help keep that, be able to explain and keep that transparency with the community.
Great. So that, nothing to be answered right now, but just if we can keep that on the mindset. And the last thing is, as we've seen, you're showing us the last 2 years, the last 5 years, and how dramatically. Do you have a forecast of what it's going to be in project for the next 2 years, the next 4 years? Like, we all know what's going on, but can we forecast?
Some of those lessons learned, I think the challenge we've got, really, you look back the last 5 years, where we thought we'd be 5 years ago, none of us could have forecasted that we'd be right where we're at. And I think that's some of the concern as to even trying to forecast a year out, is we just don't know with the numbers that we're seeing, being in this, it's still staggering to see 67% increase over 3 years.
It is.
And not knowing what that's going to look like with some other decisions that are being considered at different levels of government. I think we just don't know at this point.
Right, because it makes it kind of challenging as we talk about future road projects, knowing the cliff that's in front of us and how expensive it's going to be. How do we level set that expectation of the residents feeling that there needs to be more projects, we need to do more, and yet we know that that's just going to be crazy costs in the future?
Well, and I think we're looking at some different ways to do that. I think some of that is taking some of these longer corridors and looking at them in smaller pieces that allow us to be able to turn over that design and that construction faster so we can mitigate some of that risk that you've got with these projects that take a long time to develop and deliver because you do open yourself up to that market fluctuation.
Thank you so much for your work.
Last but not least.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you all so much for working on the Carolina Pines Improvement Project and finding a way forward. I had gotten some good news from Michael just before this meeting, so I knew what was coming, and I just appreciate you guys looking into this, and I do believe there was some support, partnership with Raleigh Stormwater and Water Department, so I just want to say thank you, and for everyone just being a little bit more creative on this, and luckily, I guess the cost overrun is not as much as some others, so there was an ability to figure this out, and I know folks on Carolina Pines Avenue and in that neighborhood are so excited to see these changes. I had one resident reminding me, he's like, oh, I remember just seeing a mom the other day, she's got her stroller, she's got, a baby, then she's got 2 kids, like little ducklings going behind her, and there's no sidewalks here, and it's a curvy road, and people are running around so fast, and so the safety improvements here, I think, are just wonderful, and it's going to connect this neighborhood that's truly close to downtown and a lot of what's going on in Raleigh all of a sudden in a way that I think is going to be phenomenal. So thank you, guys.
All right, we'll start back at that end of the table and come down another time.
Well, the only thing I wanted to say is I know that the city manager indicated that, we'll be having some very thoughtful conversations about the schedule for bonds and things along those lines, but I do want to remind folks that the financial uncertainty for our residents has really changed since how things looked last fall, and I don't necessarily know what the appetite's going to be for, and I'm sure we'll get a ton of feedback about it when those presentations come, but I just don't know that people are going to necessarily have the appetite to entertain a variety of bonds just based on, things that passed last fall with the county and anticipation. So I think as we're having conversations with folks, we have to also make sure that people who can afford it understand that we do have to look out for folks who can't afford it. And so that really is going to be impactful in terms of our conversations at the table about what we're going to be able to entertain and what we're going to be able to schedule.
Councilor Patton.
Yeah, and kind of building off that, this might be just a repetition of some other things we've heard. I just think about public trust a lot when I hear a lot of this. Like the voters voted on a bond package, and my residents living on and off of Marsh Creek are saying that that's not even, it was part of the package when they voted on it, and it's not happening. And so if we call another bond and we say, like, no, for real, we're going to do it this time, I'm not sure we've given them a lot of incentive to believe us. Six Forks Road, it's agonizing to see that that's back being a conundrum. It's obviously been painful for you all as well. But we had a lot of public engagement last time, and it was inconclusive. Really, we saw the community really just saying to us, like, we don't even really care, just get it done. That kind of continues to be. I was at St. Timothy's not too long ago, and that was the conversation that was still occurring even today. And so I think it could be difficult to propose a new transportation bond to residents when we haven't finished the projects or haven't finished them in totality. So I'll just be reckoning with that. One actual question I do have, I have two. One is related specifically to the Marsh Creek project. I know it's designed, but the construction funding's not available until some future time. Can you talk to me about when you were making the difficult decision on which projects to prioritize and not, like, what were the conditions under which Marsh Creek was the one that got booted?
So I'm trying to recall, I believe that was 22 that we were having that conversation. And we had, back in 2020 when Leesville was identified, we had started to identify a growing gap. But then it really kind of escalated as we got towards that 22 timeframe. And there were a number of different projects and options that were kind of put before the council for consideration at that point. And ultimately, I wouldn't say that staff prioritized one over the other. I think it was just a nature of where they were in the process and some of the growing feedback that had come from projects and different things. But I wouldn't say that one thing ranked it over the other. I think there were just a number of different conversations that were had at the table when we presented those options to the council.
Got it. Okay. And then my other question, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer it right off the bat, or it might be something for reflection, but I'm wondering if there are self-inflicted barriers that we could reduce as a city organization to make these projects easier. I know we have to collaborate with the state and, several state departments, but I'm just wondering if there's any code changes or other policy changes we could make to allow these projects to progress more swiftly.
That's a tough one to answer. I think when you look back over the history, I think really while we're standing here having this conversation is really the unprecedented situation that we've seen not only with the construction market, but the real estate market, which is really, thinking about Six Forks, that original budget was roughly $31 million, and we're estimating over $40 million just for acquisition now. So I think just looking at those two factors alone have really been the biggest things that have challenged that, because I think we started to identify as these projects even got early into project development, the market was starting to change on us, and obviously as part of that, COVID hit, and so that just it all changed underneath of us, and I think it's really hard to pinpoint anything more than really those there.
I have a question, then a comment. When you do the cost estimating for the bonds, do you escalate it out 5 to 6 years, knowing that inflation and other unvariables may come into factor? So if you're saying, okay, the bond's 2017 to 2019 dollars, you'll escalate it by inflation, but in fact, it could take 5 or 6 years. Just trying to understand, although it's still going to be unpredictable, I'm just trying to understand some of the estimating that you do, how many years out, so it's closer to what you expect versus what we're seeing of prices just escalating out of control. Out of your control, I'll just say.
And I can't speak specifically to the 2017 bond, but I do know that we do try and factor escalation into those equations. And certainly I think we've learned a lot over the course of the last 7 years in terms of how we refocus that and reorient that as we move forward.
I'm sorry, again.
So I'm just going to jump up here and give you just a little bit of insight. So Paul Callen, the train station director. So I think one big lesson learned, just to touch on a couple of the council members. So when we came out of 2017, we basically started design on every project. Looking back, that's probably not what we need to be doing. We need to have some things teed up, have that design done. Then we can look at some initial estimating to get a better approximation of what we think these projects are going to be. So my personal opinion, just coming out of the gate with, say, 8 or 10 projects on design, that would not be my recommendation going forward. You need to have some things teed up for design, so when the council looks at supporting, or the community looks at supporting another bond, we'd have things in the process ready to go to right-of-way acquisition and construction. So that would just be a big lesson learned. I just want to point out to everybody on that.
Yeah, my comment, and please allow me, my colleagues, a little bit of therapy here. In my previous job, managed, 850 capital projects, and now being on this side of the table, I agree with what Councilmember Jones is saying. We do have to communicate to the public exactly what the process is. There are things that are out of our control, as you probably know. There's cost. Right now, I'm hearing in certain places, workers are walking off the job for fear of ICE agents coming in, and so you're seeing project delays. As projects get delayed, whether subs can't go to the job, time starts to escalate cost. And even though I was able to reduce the timeline from 5 to 6 years to 3 to 4 years, people kept saying it still takes too long and it's costing so much. So I think it's important. There's a design process, the procurement process, and the construction process. I think it's a great idea that we will figure out a better way of explaining to the public what is happening. All you want to deliver these projects and assets as quickly as possible, but there are things that are just out of our control, and that's not like the private sector. You have to follow certain procurement rules. You have to go out, put out a bid, get the lowest responsible bidder. There are certain steps that you're required to do, and I think it may be helpful to explain to the public, but doing it as quickly as possible, and I agree with you, having design up front is a great approach. So I appreciate that you're thinking about it, because at the end of the day, it delays projects, which you don't want to do. There are shortfalls, which you don't want to go back to the public, as Councilmember Patton said. And so I think this is a great opportunity and a moment to figure out with the next bond package how to try a different approach, because these are critical, important projects.
Councilor Lambert.
I know we have another topic, so I'm going to add very briefly. Thank you very much for Carolina Pines. I'm sorry I started with the doom and gloom with Six Forks. I should have started with the thank you. I know that's going to be very impactful for the community. And then the second point, I just want to reiterate, I do think it would be great if we could come up with some mechanism for speeding up these projects. I know that's easier said than done. But I think having almost like pre-template designs where we know we're going to go in, like with Six Forks Road, we knew that was going to be a multimodal project and a road widening project. Something that's like pre-slotted that the public can see and be like, this is what we're going to put here. You know, I do hear a common complaint from some folks that in Raleigh we talk about things for so long and then they don't get built. You know, I think sometimes there's something, too much community engagement, which I realize that's a soundbite that's going to be taken out of context and used against me. But I think that there's a time to talk and then a time to act, and we have to know the difference. And if we can get these critical infrastructure projects sped up, maybe with just like I said, pre-templated designs of here's what's going to happen in these areas, that could really help. So that may be something we may want to consider moving towards.
Let me just echo what Councilmember Lambert Melton just said. There was a process that had 6 public engagement meetings. We narrowed it down to 1. That saved 6 to 7 months with, I cannot begin to tell you the huge savings. If it is predictable up front, so I concur that you don't want to shortchange public engagement, but I think you have to have it ready where you have that one input and then proceed, because we want to make sure we understand to the public that that extra 6 or 7 months has a dollar value. And in some cases, it can push a project basically out of the point where you have to cover that shortfall. So I think we're here to help, as Councilmember Jones stated to you, whatever we can to do, but I think we have to communicate to the public when it comes to construction. Time is of the essence because there are so many unvariable that will drive up cost.
All right. Yep.
Yeah, just one more quick comment, more broadly about just our current economic situation. I wonder, Marshall, how we will think about this for the budget, you know, moving forward into this next year, the level of uncertainty, potential prices rising across our, you know, all of our programs. How do we consider that in our budget conversations?
So each of our departmental budget meetings, we are taking a conservative approach to the draft that we bring you, understanding that there are some knowns, right? We know that interest rates probably are not going to shift in a way that's going to be favorable for any of the work that we do. We also know that the cost of doing business, like keeping the lights on and things like that, probably aren't going down in the next couple of years too. So those are already built into just the day-to-day operational cost. The requests that the departments have brought forward, in addition to just their base budget, but their supplementals, we are prioritizing those through various lenses as to what probably can happen, what we probably won't be able to do in the next 1 to 3 years, and what we may need to punt for longer, and then going back and assessing what is the potential fallout and negative impact of not doing it, the unintended consequences of kicking the ball. The parks bond the transportation bond of 2017, it was almost a statement, right? It was, we're gonna go big or we're gonna go home. Anybody that's been doing this for a moment understands that you do bond work typically in a bite-sized chew, something that you can deliver upon, because you're asking the voters for their confidence in you and the process to deliver on what they said, yes, raise my taxes for. And so when you can't deliver it fast enough, your ability to keep going back time and time again diminishes. And part of that too was getting some agreement around the table to advance Six Forks. We were in a better position as staff ready to advance the project. We couldn't get 5 votes to get to agreement as to what should be, how the project is advanced. And I wish Councilmember Branch was here because he could tell you the whole story. But the reality is everything that we do every day, we're kind of focusing on what would be probably the potential impact if we're not able to do it, and then what are the creative ways, if we have to do it, how can we do it? So this budget is going to look different because, again, as I mentioned, we won't bring a bond forward without talking to our partners at the county. The worst thing that can happen to a municipality is to put a bond out there and it fails. And so we want to make sure that there is that level of trust, but that we're being good stewards of the public's money, not just their trust, to make the ask and to be able to deliver the project that they can see in a timely manner. And that's what I think you're probably going to be our cadence and our stance moving forward in the short term anyway, just because there is so much unpredictability with the tariffs. And before it became a tariff issue with this current administration, it was whether or not we could get all this stuff from overseas as a result of COVID. Then it became not having enough workers to actually do the work. Now it's a combination of both, and then you put tariffs on top of it. While we're pretty good at predicting, and we always add a contingency to every project that we do, it again is a best guesstimate. It's the best guess based on the market, based on CPI, based on the regional market, and all those things considered. So this budget is going to look different. We are sharpening pencils, erasing this time that we haven't had to do in a long time, but being really true to not putting out there some expectations that we know we cannot deliver on.
Counselor Silver.
I know we had a conversation at the retreat about steady state. When will those conversations, I think, escalate, knowing that there's a potential for a transportation bond? I know that we're exploring steady state. When is that all going to be brought to us so we know strategically what is the next direction as we try to rationalize and kind of predict a way forward for our bonds?
Ryan Bergman, Esquire, if you can.
I'm never going to live that down, am I? Before I answer that, I do want to say that being in Charlotte the last few years, you guys are having these same discussions that we've had for years. Every big city is experiencing these same pressures. Some of the things that they've talked about, maybe to get into a little bit more detail, would be advanced planning, which means that we would set aside funds on the front end to do design to a certain point. So maybe when you go out for the actual bond, you might be at 50% design, so that it would be a little bit further along, so that you can have a little bit more certainty. It's never going to have all of the certainty, of course. But as for the question, FY26 not being a bond year, because there wouldn't be a November election either way, gives us a little bit of time, so that really your first reasonable option would be FY27. And so that doesn't mean there's not a lot of conversations we need to have, because to the point about advanced planning, there may be projects that you want to kind of get off of the ground, whether it be in, transportation presumably would be the area you'd want to look at, because housing works a little bit different. So I think finance and budget are working on a lot of the steady state financial planning. The budget team is doing a fantastic job this year, working with departments, trying to make sure that we take care of FY26 first, of course, but everything they do is in a multi-year lens. And so when we present steady state options, there will be how far down the road would you want to have some kind of a property tax increase to support the bonds? How frequently would you want to have bonds? I will tell you that we're on this 7-year cycle here. One of the advantages to a little bit shorter cycle, whether it be 4 years or 2 years, is that when you have these unexpected situations, these historical inflationary pressures, you do have more options. You might be able to say, well, the first $25 million of the next bond, which is only 2 years later or 4 years later, is going to be enough to fill in the gap on this previous project, rather than having to wait 7 years from the next bond. So, I mean, you talk about lessons learned. I was involved in Charlotte, and The manager does make me put a quarter in a jar every time I say that word, so.
That's right. $2
but-
already, right there today.
Yeah,
$2.
well, I owe it, so I'm done. But I was involved on the front end where we tried to create this advanced planning, take a different look at these projects. She mentioned bite size, which is really what we're looking into. The budget and finance infrastructure you have here is fantastic. So I think the transition will work. It's really just a matter of those conversations that have to take place, which are not FY26 budget conversations. They are the next 10 budget conversations, and presumably we'll be doing that over the little bit in the spring, and then in the summer, fall, as we move forward.
Counselor Silver has
Last
another
question. I know- This is the last one. I know there's another item. I know every A&E firm is going to write letters to me. In terms of design, is that an in-house function, or is all of that outsourced? So to get to that 50%, is there capacity in-house to do that, or all this work has to be outsourced, which requires, I'm assuming, professional contract?
So I'm going to let him answer, don't worry. I was just going to say,
This is my last
from the
question.
advanced planning program standpoint, it could be either one.
So we are contracting out our design. We we have historically done some in-house design, smaller projects, sidewalks, that sort of thing. But in the last, I would say, year and a half or so, we've started to kind of focus, kind of get away from that, and try to focus those resources on project management of consultants as we are outsourcing that design.
So my final words, congratulations to transportation for making yesterday's compensation look like a light lift. And now we have the comprehensive plan update, and we want those folks to keep it light and fun.
Don't tell us anything difficult or challenging.
I will try. Hello, I'm Sarah Shaughnessy with Raleigh Planning and Development. Pat Young and Bynum Walter are also here if you have questions for them. I am the project manager for Raleigh's next comprehensive plan. I'm here today to share some information on the project goals, the timeline, what we've done, and who we've heard from so far. So I'll provide a little bit of background and context for the plan, review our goals, and provide an update on where we are in our timeline and what we've done so far. I will also share some information about who we've heard from and our plans for ongoing communication and coordination moving forward. Comprehensive plans typically have a 20-year time horizon and lay out a long-term vision for the built environment. State law requires municipalities to adopt a comprehensive plan or a future land use map in order to enforce local zoning code and development regulations. Most municipalities in North Carolina, including Raleigh, have both. So Raleigh's comprehensive plan satisfies this legal requirement and guides land use development in coordination with transportation, environmental resource protection, population growth and housing needs, and infrastructure and service provision. Our current comprehensive plan, the 2030 comprehensive plan, was adopted in 2009 and amended most recently in 2019. Planning staff reference the plan most often to evaluate rezoning requests in the consistency analyses that we bring to you all. The plan includes 6 vision themes and various policy maps that illustrate the city's growth framework, desired urban form, future land uses, and future street connectivity. The plan also includes a breadth of content on transportation, environmental protection, economic development, parks and open space, public utilities, community facilities, and services. All told, the document is 18 sections long with over 1,000 unique policies and 1,000 different actions. I think Bynum compared it to War and Peace the last time she spoke to you all. So Reflecting Raleigh is the process for developing the city's next comprehensive plan, which will guide growth and development through the year 2050. For our next comprehensive plan, we envision a more concise document that functions primarily as a land use guide while addressing the connectivity between land use and transportation, housing, natural resources, economic development, and urban form. We also envision a plan that provides a framework for sustainable infrastructure and service provision as Raleigh grows. A document that is aligned with adopted plans, policies, and the Capital Improvement Program, or CIP. We envision a plan with a clear vision with SMART, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, or SMART, incremental goals. And finally, we envision a document that is informed by a robust engagement strategy that prioritizes reaching residents and neighborhoods that are typically underrepresented in planning processes. So we anticipate a 2.5-year timeline for developing the next plan, divided into 5 phases. Phase 1 is focused on public engagement, internal coordination, and an assessment of existing conditions and expected growth. Phase 2 will focus on developing the content of the plan with a citizen assembly and teams of technical experts. Phase 3 will involve drafting the plan. In Phase 4, we'll get input from the public on the completed draft of the plan. And then in Phase 5, we'll bring the plan forward for adoption. Our specific goals and activities for Phase 1 with respect to engagement are to provide some general information to the public and city staff, so we've been doing internal and external engagement in this phase, about the project generally, to collect input on community priorities that can be used to inform the plan's vision and policies, and again, to prioritize people and neighborhoods that are typically underrepresented in city projects. And we seek to do that through a number of activities, including 6 thematic community conversations, engagement with boards and commissions, engagement with community and neighborhood organizations, including CACs, youth engagement, individualized communication with community leaders, a series of community events, as well as online surveys. I want to highlight the community conversations specifically, since those are our largest public city-sponsored events in this phase. So the themes were selected based on topics that we hear from the community about the most in the context of growth and development. They are affordable housing, transportation and traffic, stormwater management, trees, and more broadly, urban ecosystems, sustainable infrastructure and services, and neighborhood change. And we seek to approach each of these topics through the lens of equity and sustainability. Planning staff collaborated with Housing and Neighborhoods to host a day-long affordable housing summit back in August at your request. We knew in planning that we wanted to host a community conversation for the comprehensive plan on that topic, so rather than duplicating and having another event, we joined forces with Housing and Neighborhoods and co-hosted that event.
Can I just
to kick off? Yeah.
ask you real quick?
Sure.
So public safety is not on this list at all, so folks.
Public safety we include as part of the services package of infrastructure and services. So police and fire and community facilities will be included in that.
Thanks.
So the Affordable Housing Summit kicked off our community conversation series. Each of the remaining topics has included or will include keynote and expert speakers, World Cafe tabletop conversations, Ask a Planner events where members of the public can come and speak with staff one-on-one, as well as online surveys and in-person polling opportunities. We are very grateful for the leadership and collaboration from our partner departments in hosting each of these community conversations. As I mentioned, we worked closely with Housing and Neighborhoods to host the Affordable Housing Summit, with Stormwater to host a community conversation back in December. We just wrapped up a community conversation series on transportation and traffic in February. Tonight we'll kick off the first of 2 events focused on trees, and then we have, rounding us off, conversation on neighborhood change in April, and then infrastructure and services in May and early June.
Also, just clarify, when you say neighborhood change, how are you defining that?
We are defining that as sort of both demographic change and changes to building structure, sort of looking at neighborhood evolution as a whole, how neighborhoods have came to be, and then how they've changed over the last couple of centuries, and maybe forecasting what change people can expect in the future. So in addition to all of this qualitative public engagement work that we're doing, we're also doing some quantitative research and analysis on the back end. So evaluating existing policy and researching best practices. Our goal is to use this information alongside public input to inform the development of the plan in Phase 2. Specific activities in this portion of the phase include a community inventory, so an analysis of existing conditions, a market analysis, an audit of our currently adopted plan, the 2030 plan, some research into stabilization planning, as well as a capital needs assessment. So we're a little more than halfway through the first phase of our process, and to date, we have drafted an engagement plan. We've worked with the Department of Community Engagement staff and developed this plan based on an engagement preferences survey that we put out to the community, as well as some best practices and adopted guidance that the city has for public engagement. We hosted the Affordable Housing Summit, as I mentioned. We hosted 2 community conversation series on transportation and stormwater. Pictured here is Charles Brown, who was our keynote speaker at the transportation event back in February. We've hosted a series of Ask a Planner events, presented to 13 of the city's boards and commissions, 8 of the city's CACs, spoken to 8 different community organizations, tabled at a range of events. We send monthly emails to everyone who subscribes to our GovDelivery newsletter, and we have 4 online surveys. 3 of them are topic-based, and they'll be open through June if people want to provide feedback. So here's a summary of sort of what we've done and who we've reached so far. I know we have more work to do, but we are heartened that we've seen over 2,000 people participate in some way in this process so far. So that's what we've done. Here's some information about who we've heard from through our online engagement specifically. So looking at survey respondents, so these are specifically people who responded to our online survey and opted to participate in the demographic questions. The majority of respondents are between the ages of 25 and 35. Most who have provided their demographic information identify as male. Most who participate, again, this online survey data, are non-Hispanic and white. Most are middle to high middle income and homeowners. And most are fairly well educated with a bachelor's or graduate or professional degree.
Sarah, can I just ask, so down at the bottom, that footnote, N is the total number of respondents, and the 181 number is the number of people who participate in that particular question?
Yes, that's correct. Yep. Yeah, so it's across the board. We've seen between 25 and 30% of people who answer the survey questions generally choose to answer the demographic questions. So as you can see, certain Raleigh residents are overrepresented relative to Raleigh's population overall. We know that this is a trend citywide across projects and has to do with who prefers to engage online and also who feels comfortable providing their information to the city. We also know that we are reaching a broader cross-section of residents through other engagement methods where we do not ask for demographic information and that information is not volunteered. So this is a map of our engagement locations on top of self-reported zip codes. So in part of our online surveys, we ask residents to offer their zip code where they live and where they're responding from. And because of who we know we're able to reach online, so again, those demographics that I just showed you, we're prioritizing attending and sharing information at community events that are happening in neighborhoods that look different than the demographic profile of people who respond to our online surveys. We have selected locations for our community conversations across the city, and we try to choose venues that are accessible by a range of transportation options. Our goal is to hear from everyone. So we know we're reaching a certain section of the population online, and so we're trying to supplement those efforts by reaching everyone else in the city. So for all of our in-person engagement events, we seek to remove known barriers to participation by meeting people where they are, offering language translation, food, childcare, and honoring requests for ADA accommodations. And we know based on the requests that we receive and who we see at these events that we're reaching a broader segment of Raleigh's population than our survey results might suggest. So that's who we've heard from, a little bit about what we've heard. So far, we've received input in 3 main areas: engagement preferences, affordable housing, and stormwater management. We'll be publishing a report of engagement to date next week, and I know we're a little tight on time, so I won't go through these in detail, but in the coming days or weeks, you'll be able to review all of this information in more detail. This is some of what we've heard with respect to affordable housing. So we asked residents to notify or identify some of their main concerns, some suggested solutions to address those concerns. And then similar for the topic of stormwater, we asked residents to share with us some of their major concerns with respect to stormwater in the context of a growing city, where they'd like to see policy to address those concerns, and then similarly, where they'd like to see the city invest in programs to address those concerns. So as I noted, a summary report of our engagement to date will be available soon. We also have a full engagement plan available on our website now to look at some of this data in the context of Raleigh's demographics as a whole. We'll be publishing a full report of all of our engagement activities at the end of phase 1, so at the end of the summer. Our online surveys, again, as I noted, will remain open through June. We're still encouraging residents to participate, and we're exploring additional ways to boost participation and diversity of those results. And because we understand that not everyone wants to take an online survey, We're continuing to meet people where they are and provide ways to reduce barriers to participation. So the goal is for all of this input to shape the vision, goals, and policies in phase 2 of the project. So phase 2, again, our goals here are to develop the plan, and we seek to do that with a series of technical working groups, subject matter experts, so each of these will include staff, local practitioners, subject matter experts, along with representatives from the city's boards and commissions. We will also convene a citizen assembly, which will consist of 50 or so Raleigh residents whose demographic and social characteristics mirror Raleigh's demographic and social characteristics overall. We are in the process of soliciting a consultant through the RFP process to help support that effort. Phase 3 will be plan drafting, where we take a break and actually write the plan so that we have something to come back to the public and get feedback on. Although we will continue to have check-ins with the citizen assembly, the technical working groups, keep the public updated. We'll come back to you with an update. And then phase 4, we will have a completed version of the plan. We'll take that back out to verify program and policy priorities, come back to the community and tell them, this is what you told us. We've developed a plan. What do you think? And we seek to do that through public workshops, Ask a Planner events, tabling in different pop-up events, again, seeking to meet the community where they are, building on events that are already happening. And then we are also working with Raleigh Arts to host an artist in residence to help us think more creatively about how we engage the public and incorporate that feedback. Finally, phase 5, at the end of 2027, we'll bring the final plan forward for adoption. So throughout the process, just have a couple more slides here, we have been and will be coordinating with other city staff whose work overlaps with the comprehensive plan. So again, we're very grateful for all of the other department staff who have helped us with the community conversations. We're continuing to have policy discussions based on what we hear from the public and the implications for new policy in the comprehensive plan. We've been coordinating with the Office of Strategy and Innovation to talk about how the strategic plan aligns with the comprehensive plan and how we communicate that to the public. And then we are also tracking a number of related plans and engagement efforts, so we're making sure that we're building on those and not duplicating. And finally, we're continuing communication with the public. So we have a project website, continue to post updates and information and links to surveys there. We have information on Engage Raleigh, which is our public input hub site. Our communications team has been doing this Reflecting Raleigh portrait project, where they go and they talk to kind of intercept interview style, talk to Raleigh residents where they are, ask them if they can take a photo, and ask them to share something about what they like about Raleigh, what they envision for the future. So this is Molly, a young mother who they photographed for that project, and then again, the monthly newsletter. Excuse me. So that concludes my presentation. I look forward to taking your questions.
Great. Councilor Silver has a question.
I'll limit it to a couple, and then I'll let my colleagues answer. Well, first, thank you so much for the presentation. Just had a couple of questions. I know Patrick and I had a previous conversation. Just want to be assured. Public engagement is essential to any comprehensive planning process, but also the emerging issues, trends, so the public understands what problems they're solving. I am hoping we'll see that. Again, as you all know, I was involved in the 2009, and I expect the 2030 plan that there will be a new plan. But to understand we're running out of land, we're running out of water, we're running out of natural resources, that also has to be put before the public. They'll talk about what they want to see. Issues today will not be issues 20 years from now. So just want to make sure as we have this conversation that part of the analysis will talk about the fact that we're running out of land, which means there'll be tension in neighborhoods with transitions, with density, with different housing types. Just want to make sure that is part of the conversation versus this what I'd like to see. It's very hard to deliver on that, but that the aspiration for where the city is going is balanced with the emerging and critical issues we need to solve. That's something that I'd certainly like to see so that we know as we go forward, these are the tough choices and the public's also educated on some of the challenges they need to face versus what they would like to see. So I'm just hoping that certainly will be a part of it. So I don't know whether that's part of it. I saw the research. I wasn't sure if that was part of it, so can you explain to me, will there kind of be that section of the community inventory or a list of the emerging issues so we know what we'll be facing over the next 20 years? Because running out of land and accommodating the growth, there'll be some tough choices, which we're experiencing right now, the rezonings, through transitions and people purchasing, missing middle. We just want to have a better conversation with the public of what to expect, so don't have a rosy picture that if we raise these issues, everything will be addressed to their satisfaction.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. So you are correct. We are doing a number of sort of research investigation tasks, including the community inventory, a capital needs assessment, so we understand what our needs might be as a city as Raleigh's population grows. And we are packaging all of that information to bring to the technical teams to develop the policy, to bring to the citizen assembly, and to share with the public as part of phase 2. We are also, as part of the community inventory, developing a data dashboard. So we'll have a standalone report, but then also an interactive dashboard. We're hoping that will be available at the end of the summer so that people can explore the data themselves and understand some of the constraints and trade-offs.
Yeah, and then the last one, I'll let my colleagues speak. Also looking for a tool or a map, not saying it should be the growth framework map, but a map to show where change is expected and where change is not expected. I think it was very comforting to a lot of community members when they saw if they were in a certain area, they didn't expect any major change. But if they're in an area that's expected to grow, whether it's on a transit corridor or a growth center, they know on those edges is where change is expected. Or vulnerable areas. If, for example, there's a community that could experience displacement, if that is highlighted, so there are some policies that focus on potential protections or conservation so they won't feel as if they'll get pushed out. I think having that, I don't want to call it a vulnerability map, but having the map of both where change is expected, where places could be threatened, I think would be very helpful for the community. And I think for council as we start to come up with some of these land use policies and land use map.
So I have a handful. One, and this might be sort of a reframing of the same question, but when you came to us before you initiated the process, there was a discussion about like an effort to quantify the trade-offs as citizens were going through this. So saying, yes, we can protect all the trees and never cut down another tree again, and the consequences would be this other thing, and do you want that other thing, or do you want something in the middle? And so and I've been to some of the events, but I think I've been to the ones where there's a keynote and more oriented toward learning than I haven't been hearing from the resident discussion. But can you talk about how you've built that into the community engagement you've done so far?
Absolutely, yeah. So each community conversation features a keynote speaker, somebody who can speak to sort of the state of the practice at a national level or provide an example from a peer city to provide some context to what Raleigh is experiencing. And then the second evening, we have a state of the city presentation from a city staff member to sort of bring some of those topics to the Raleigh context. And then we have a community conversation. We use the World Cafe facilitation method. And the questions that we ask as part of that are sort of centered around trade-offs, sort of getting people to explore, without explicitly asking them, well, do you want this or do you want this? Sort of explore what are some of the trade-offs. If you develop further afield, that might mean that you have a longer transportation commute, and that means that you're in the car more. Looking at that trade-off versus developing more densely. So we've included that in the community conversation questions, the World Cafe questions, and then we also have an online survey that we publish in conjunction with each community conversation, and we try to frame our questions around those trade-offs as well as part of that survey.
Okay, sweet. And then another one that I have is around citizen assemblies. I'm excited to see that tool used. It's one I've been interested in, and I think it really does a lot to reduce polarization. Like, you have a high degree of efficacy before you push something out from the group, and so I think that's a really great tool. 50 residents feels like a lot. Or is that like all 50 of those residents are going to be around a conference table, or is it segmented into smaller?
Yeah, I think we are seeking the help of a consultant to help us think through the best facilitation style and strategy. I think the 50 number gives us a good statistically significant sample of the Raleigh population. Without, I think one of the worries is you don't want to tokenize, you don't want to have like one person representing one particular demographic category, so they feel like they have to represent all residents who look like them. You want to have at least 2, so that's where that number comes from. But I imagine it will involve some small group discussion as part of that. So not everyone is, you're not trying to manage a conversation among 50 people.
Thank you so much for your work. As we were having these difficult conversations prior to this, and we're talking about how expensive things are, I was looking at your chart, and in February you did the conversation about transportation and transit. Was that folded into the conversation about how expensive things are getting and level setting at the early ages, or is that something that's going to be folded into our communication moving forward?
That was not explicitly addressed as part of the community conversation State of the City presentation, but it's certainly an issue that we understand we're facing as a city, that residents are facing, and we'll move it into the communication moving forward.
Fantastic. Yeah, I just think that if there are other ways, instead of creating new opportunities all over and people having to have another conversation about that, if we can fold it into this already overarching discussion we're having about growth in the city, these might be beneficial to be part of that conversation. So thank you.
All right. I do not see any other questions.
I just want to commend staff. As you know, I'm very passionate about planning and very excited to see that there's another generation of planning going forward. Both the city manager, I'm sure Patrick will keep me on this side of the table. This is stuff that I love doing, and so I will only answer when called, but this is an exciting opportunity. What is refreshing, and I see you doing it, comprehensive planning is also an opportunity to educate the public about how the city works from a land use point of view, but all the other thing attached with transportation and parks, community facilities. So just want to commend you for the work that you're doing, and I'm very excited to see the road ahead. Thank you for the timeline, 2027, so I have some decisions to make to see this to the very end. But again, I commend you for your work and look forward to how this unfolds.
Sorry, one more from me. One question I get from residents somewhat regularly is just this kind of question of like, did we do the last plan? Like, are we doing the plan? Will your community, is the community inventory the moment when we'll say, we got a B+ on doing the plan?
Yeah, so I think some of the content in the last plan lays out very clear like performance metrics for saying, okay, we set out this goal, this is how we know we're achieving that goal. Some of the content does not have those metrics, so we don't have a good way to evaluate. So an example is we've outlined in our growth framework map where we want to grow in terms of along transit corridors and in growth centers. And we can quantify that with building activity, with population, looking sort of at census tract level. I think for this next plan, we are going to be really intentional about setting performance metrics. So setting goals and then sort of understanding how we might communicate to the public whether or not we're achieving them.
And then, but like, will we get an assessment of the current plan, the 2030 plan?
Yes, to the best of our ability, yeah.
Under Councilmember Silver's excellent guidance, the former plan included policy that required us to publish annual progress reports, which we have done pretty faithfully over the last, I can't do the math, 10 plus years. And so I can share those with you. We have, I don't know if you remember one of the stats Sarah called out was like 1,000 plus actions. We've completed, I think, more than 75% of those in the intervening years. So we have done a lot of the plan, yes. And we will do this plan too, yeah.
If you allow me the liberty, it did feature an implementation matrix, which was really the first of its time, and that required that we go to the city council annually for a report, which also included other trends council needed to look out for. And if you look at that matrix, it actually will say completed. So there's a pretty good track record, even after I left, that staff continued to look at that implementation matrix. And it was copied by many other jurisdictions. So that was useful. And also the annual report, I don't know if you did that, Bynum, if you want to stand up, that also included policies the council was reluctant to implement or city departments struggled with. So we said, then take it out. If there was a reluctance to follow this policy guidance, or for some reason a department now had second thoughts, rather than keeping in the plan and having false expectations of the public, it's better just to take it out. And so that annual report was very useful to kind of do a check-in to see how the plan was performing, the public understood what was implemented, but more importantly, what policies need to be taken out because they just weren't working. So that was a good look back. And again, I'm not saying I'm retiring, the ball is now in your court, but there were certain, I think, innovations that were very effective. And to answer Councilmember Patton's, that it performed over time quite well. And so I can only imagine it's going to get better for this next round, whether it's a 2050 plan, 2050 plan.
No pressure. Well, that was, I think, happier and less expensive. So we are, that concludes this work session, and we are adjourned.